Hello there, this is Dr. Dave King again. I wanted to go ahead and recreate the lecture that I just gave to the dental students at the American Student Dental Association recently here at Kansas City at UMKC, where I went to dental school. So this is the lecture that I gave, the basics of Inlay and Onlay, an introduction to conservative indirect restorations with CEREC, Omnicam, and MCXL. So I've been using CEREC since 2006. Since I came out of dental school, I bought 2 units late in 2006 and have enjoyed it ever since. Really a great solution to provide restorations, indirect restorations, conservative, inlays and onlays like you can see here, in a way that allows our patients to, provides a great service to them. So this is me. Graduated, I went to Central Missouri State 96 where I studied jazz, and this is something that a lot of patients don't know about me. A lot of people don't know about me for that reason. I was a jazz trumpet player first. That was me first and foremost. Did that for a year, then I went to Taiwan as a missionary. This is "which is so in Mandarin Chinese. 我会说国语, so I speak some Mandarin. I used to speak very fluently, and now I don't speak so fluently anymore because it's been so long. But I still can understand a little bit of Mandarin from my time as a missionary in Taiwan. When I returned from Taiwan, I was a business major again at Central Missouri State University. My plan was, since I could speak some Chinese, I'd go ahead and jump on the business train and eventually work some international position. After that, I married the daughter of an orthodontist in 2000 and changed my major to biology and chemistry, preparatory to going into dental school, where I started in 2006. In 2002 rather. After graduating in 2006, I started a scratch start practice in Liberty, Missouri, which is one of the suburbs of Kansas City. I bought another practice about a year later in Independence, Missouri. I sold both of them, joined a group working at the same offices in Independence and Liberty, and then I joined a Pacific Dental Services supported office in Albuquerque in 2014. I worked in Albuquerque for about 3.5 years and have since relocated back to Missouri. I am on the St. Louis side of the state now, near O'Fallon, Missouri. So that's me. These are some of the cases that I've completed. Done with CEREC. Every single one of these has a CEREC involvement. So if you look through these cases, very, very interesting. Up here we've got a same-day bridge. Same thing here, same-day bridge. You can see a 5-unit bridge there. Here we have a 4-unit makeover right there. Same-day bridge. This one happened with an extraction, so we designed a little ovate bullet-shaped ponic to go up into the extraction site. Same thing here. This dark tooth number 7 you can see there was extracted. And a 4-unit bridge delivered the same day. So all this stuff so far has been same day. This is as well a 6-unit makeover, a little bit of darkening there, which we did replace that crown later on. Down here we've got halfway through, this is 10 crowns. This is BL1, the whitest shade that I was comfortable going. There's a little bit lighter shade, but that's BL1 and Emax. Done in one sitting. That was about 4 hours for 10 crowns. You can see his previous setup here. Wanted to open his bite, so we opened him a little bit. The plan was to do the lower teeth at a later date once he recovered from the uppers. Here is one of my favorite x-rays. 3 canals here, 5 canals total, endo with a nice crown there. Here is another kind of a significant makeover case. You can see there's a 5-unit bridge, a 3-unit bridge, and 3 individual crowns there. This essentially is a duplicate of that one. Sorry, I didn't realize I had 2 of them in there. Here's just a nice endo case with a crown on it, Emax crown. Some of the training that I've been able to do, I was able to help create some coursework for the CEREC tie base restoration training. I was able to write an article. I was asked to write an article about CEREC and same-day restoration modalities using a surgical guide. So you can see the guide in place there. It was interesting. You don't see the whole picture here, but I decorneated the tooth. You can still see the roots here. I decorneated the tooth. We drilled the osteotomy using the surgical guide. Then I took the roots out. You can see little root crypts here, 1, 2, 3. placed the implant, I had already drilled the osteotomy, so the implant went right into the interfocal area. There's the tie base with the scanning body on top, and then there's the healing abutment with some bone graft material and several stitches over the top to hold it closed. So that was all done in one appointment. We delivered the crown later, but that was all scanned and extracted and implant placed in one appointment. This is a CEREC case, so a single appointment, 6 crowns, 6 CEREC crowns. That's a GC product. I really like CEREC. This was a patient who came in. You can see significant caries there. She'd come in and wanted to do something about her smile. She was a homemaker, had been frustrated for quite a while with her smile. She had dramatically changed her oral hygiene, and so I was very comfortable doing this. But that was one appointment. Again, about 2.5 hours, maybe as long as 3. This is the same case here. This is the same case there. This one, actually, this guy belongs to that one. So you can see here's the restoration that went in. You can see this slide is actually the same as that whole slide there. There's the implant restoration right there, the tie-based restoration. Very, very fun procedure to do once you've done a few of them and you're not too stressed about getting them done. Here is a standard, I believe that's an internal hexagon implant platform there at Nobel Biocare implant. There's the tie base in place, and then there's the Emax screw retained crown. So I've had a great opportunity to do a lot of fun cases. I've got a lot of experience I really enjoy. I'm not saying that I know everything, but I have had a lot of experience. So if any of you have any questions, please let me know. I'm always happy to help create some more discussion topics, training materials as well. So here's the objectives of what we're going to go through today. Hopefully I can get through this in about a half an hour or so. I'm going to kind of fly through it, so if you feel like you need to take time to digest it, please pause the video. We're going to define what inlays and onlays are. We're going to describe the rationale for an inlay or an onlay, apply the principles of appropriate preparation design, appropriately diagnose an inlay versus an onlay, identify various materials, understand inlay and onlay bonding protocols. This is really, really critical, doing this correctly. And it's slightly different from crowns, just ever so slightly. We'll talk about that a little bit. Normally, and I'll give you a spoiler, normally when I'm putting an inlay or an onlay in, I actually apply the cement to the tooth instead of the restoration. It's just too hard to hold the restoration covered with cement. So this is what we're going to do today, really briefly, hopefully. So let's start here. Let's talk about inlays and onlays. What is an inlay and onlay? Let's define this. All right, so we know from the ADA that an inlay is an intracoronal dental restoration, and here is the critical piece, is that it's intracoronal, made outside the oral cavity to conform to the prepared cavity, which, and here's another important piece, does not restore any cusp tips. There are no cusp tips involved in an inlay. So cusp tips do not constitute an inlay. If there's a cusp tip, then that's, a spoiler alert, going to be an onlay, but we're not doing onlays just yet. So let's talk about the different inlays we can provide. Of course, we have our metallic inlays and then our ceramic ones. There's also a composite inlay, which we generally call a composite restoration, but you can also make a composite inlay depending on what you want to do. Generally speaking, I use, more than any of the other codes here, I use this one because almost every inlay that I'm going to do has 3 or more surfaces. MOD or MOB or MOL or DOL or OBL. Rarely is there ever a single surface inlay that I'll design. So here's the onlay. The definition of onlay is essentially the same. It's a dental restoration made outside the oral cavity that covers 1 or more cusp tips and adjoining occlusal surfaces, but not the entire surface. All right? So, and again, here's the one that I use most. It's most of the time this guy right here, this 2643, but sometimes we'll get into the 4 or more surfaces. So, all right, let's talk about the rationale for an inlay or an onlay. Inlay or onlay indications. Incipient lesions, recurrent decay around conservative restorations, correcting old restoration contours, and any small to moderate size carious lesion. Why do we make that distinction here, small to moderate size? Well, if you get a large one, that's probably going to indicate more than an inlay or an onlay, probably a crown, right? So that's generally the rationale for small to moderate. Usually the inlay or the onlay are more conservative, so I would limit it to small and moderate. Anytime you get past moderate size, you should be considering a core buildup with a crown on it. So here are a few situations. Some of these pictures are mine, some are not. The ones on the right side here, these are my scanned images, or screen grabs rather, from the CEREC machine. So this one, in my particular experience, I would probably have done at least an onlay there, potentially a crown. This one, obviously a crown. This one, yeah, we could have gotten away with an inlay depending on how far it extended up. This is the unicorn, the single surface inlay, which I don't get to do a lot of right here. Generally speaking, this unicorn single surface inlay is difficult to do. Just because of where the sprue is placed from the ceramic. And then of course here's a 3-surface inlay. So indication for an onlay, just an idea. Of course we've got all this area involved here. There's also what looks like a fracture here and maybe there, I'm not sure. So that would be something that you might consider potentially a full crown on, but if we can save most, come up in here and remove that and cover the occlusal portion, that'd be great. Something similar to this that you see here. So occasionally we'll see this where you've got a fractured portion here, and then we just prep off the lingual portion or the buccal portion, and we can save all this tooth structure with our inlay or an onlay. So long-term success rates. These are some very interesting success rate numbers that I'll just draw to your attention. Let's see. So survival rate of, let me highlight here, survival rate of probability of 87.5% up to 27 years of clinical service of CEREC 1. That's CEREC 1. So let's circle that, 87.5 at 27 years. Let me fix that, 27 years. And this is actually the same study extended a little bit earlier. So this one has 88.7 after 17 years. That's phenomenal. That's great for an inlay or an onlay. Some of these other studies, let's see if I can find it. Estimated survival rates for glass ceramics at 5 years were 92 and 95%. That dramatically beats out any composite in my experience. And here's another one, 95.5% for 5 years. So we're talking high 90s, high 90%. All right, so definitely a good solution long term. And let me highlight that, long term. Composites oftentimes are short term solutions. Let's talk about preparation design. Okay, avoid sharp angles. That's probably the biggest takeaway here. Avoid these sharp angles that you can see here. We want everything to be rounded and flowing, and the reason for that is, especially when we're talking about CEREC, you've got a burr that's going to be milling. Let's say this is the restoration. So we're going to assume that this is solid instead of a negative right here. The burr, which is a circle, has to go in and cut all these areas out from the outside, right? So it's milling from the outside. Can you imagine having a circular burr that's going to try to get into that little edge, or this area? Not going to happen. Or that area effectively, or that one. That's why everything needs to be rounded. So we need to round everything appropriately and make sure there's enough extension for the burrs to mill it correctly. Otherwise, when you try to seat it, you're going to get a nice fracture. Here's kind of a problem there. Can you see that the round burr is not going to be able to get into that spot? It's just impossible. Here's the proposal. You've got a sharp edge there. Round burrs can't do sharp edges. You've got an incredibly sharp edge there. Round burrs can't do sharp edges. So what'll happen is, because the computer is programmed to undermill on the margin where there's a question, you'll end up with, the ceramic will come around and you'll end up with this rounded area. And then when you try to seat it, you'll get a fracture. You'll get a big chipped portion there, or it may even break all the way through if you push too hard. So everything has to be rounded. Like we talked about here, you have to round everything nice and rounded. None of these sharp, jaggedy, pokey things. And we got to have adequate reduction. So here's the machine in process. Now it's in slow-mo, so you can see how those burrs are milling from the outside in. So any area that's got a sharp edge, really sharp edge, that's just not going to mill it. All right? So round your edges. Make sure you've got nice emergence exits on your design. Okay, here are our emergence profiles here. So we want to make sure that we have nice approaching 90-degree angle emergence profiles. This one may be just a little bit shy of 90 in both of those. But the idea is we don't want to have any unsupported enamel in these areas, and we want to make sure that cleansability is managed. If you were to have this exit, somewhere in here, can you imagine trying to clean and burnish and smooth that area? So always extend these out, break the contact to a point where you can easily see it. There's no unsupported enamel, and you've got a nice cleansable area, especially for the patient's toothbrush. Generally speaking, when you're doing an inlay or an onlay, you don't want to keep it ultra super conservative interproximally like you would a composite, just because it's so much easier to clean it, deliver it, cement it when you have a nice 90-degree exit angle that is visible and workable and cleansable to you and the patient. Let's talk about axial walls. The axial walls can be prepared vertically, converge or slightly divergent to the floor. Now ideally we want this right here. This is our kind of our golden, what we're shooting for, 4 to 6 degrees of taper. And why is that? Well, you want the restoration you want it to mate perfectly with the internal line angles of the preparation. You want it to actually physically touch the tooth. Now if we have this, we'll have a bunch of cement that has to fill in these areas. And will that work? Sure, it'll work, but it's not the best, the most ideal situation. Now if they're perfectly vertical, this could be a nightmare trying to insert, trying to deliver. So always shoot for this golden 4 to 6 degrees. Don't over taper it, because if you over taper it, if you've got this over tapered design and you've got the restoration that goes in like this, you're going to have this area that's really thin and you'll get a fracture through there. So you want to make sure that the internal axial walls are as vertical or slightly tapered. Slightly tapered, of course, is the goal. Slightly tapered for best long-term outcome. All right, so here's a couple of ideas, couple of examples to look at. We want to avoid these S-curves, these big S-curves. Dr. McMillan, when I was in school, called that the crab claws. Nice straight exit angles. Avoid these bevels here. You can see you got a bevel there. That's going to leave a really thin piece of porcelain, which is likely to break off in the restoration. So avoid bevels. You want nice strength of porcelain and strength of tooth, and that's what that 90 degrees is good for. So gentle and rounded curves. We all know from ceramics that everything needs to be rounded. We don't want anything sharp. Round and curve everything. Proximal box shape. Again, we want to round everything internally. Make sure that it's smooth and rounded. Avoid these sharp edges. Like for metals, for gold, and I've got a cast gold inlay in my mouth, it's got nice sharp edges, and that's perfectly fine for gold because it can be blocked out in the process and filled with cement. But we want nice rounded edges. Rounded is the key with anything ceramic. Slight taper, 4 to 6. This one has 6 to 8, so very, very slight taper. Avoid undercuts. Nice smooth floor and avoid sharp internal angles. That basically covers everything with regard to proximal box shape. Check your depth, 2 millimeters at the central groove. Make sure it's not too shallow. Depending on where you measure it, it may determine how deep it is, so check it at the central groove here instead of off to the side. You may have this area may be too thin if you're checking the depth incorrectly. So check your depth at the central groove, so be cautious of that. All right, here are a couple of inlays that have been placed. The key here is this guy right here, adequate tooth reduction. It's easy to under-reduce, and this will create challenges for us, problems for us going forward. So don't under-reduce. Make sure there's adequate tooth reduction. You're going to be replacing it with a high-strength ceramic bonded in place, so you don't need to sweat removing a little bit more tooth structure to gain appropriate strength. Okay, the only big difference between inlays and onlays is the amount of reduction over the cusp tips. So, and this essentially applies to almost all ceramic crown restorations, 2 millimeters over functional, 1.5 over non-functional. We don't need to worry about metallic, principles of retention form, because these are going to be bonded in place. So, nice straight exit angles that'll give you a lot of enamel, this wide band of enamel to bond to, really high bond strengths. So bonded, again, we're not cementing. We want to avoid these, avoid the mechanical retention features like grooves and slots. We just don't need them. So look at all this enamel here. Look how wide that enamel band is, and how wide that enamel band is. Plenty of enamel to bond to. A little sharp angle here, be cautious of that. This looks a little sharp in there. Potentially, depending on where the margin is, that may be a little too beveled. You might have some thin spots there. But generally speaking, all three of these are very, very acceptable. Passive fit, avoid again these metallic restoration features where you've got mechanical retention. We just don't need it when we're bonding. Here's a beautiful preparation. This would be classed as an onlay because we're covering this cusp tip. Couple of concerns here. Of course, you want to make sure you don't have any undercuts here, and then you want to make sure you don't have any undercuts here, and then the angle that's there. So just be very cautious when you're preparing to make sure that everything is diverging slightly, 4 to 6 or 4 to 8 degree divergence. But that's a nice prep. Look at all the tooth structure that they were able to save with this prep. Just beautiful. Okay. All right, let's talk about diagnosing inlays and onlays, when to recommend them and how to recommend them to our patients. These are a couple of cases I've shown you before here just a little bit ago. So here's the area again where you've got all this yuck here and the potential cracks. So there's the preparation of that particular tooth right there. One thing to pay attention to is when you get these little thin areas where there's only enamel that's unsupported, this might be, maybe a good idea to consider coming over and then covering that whole back half of the tooth. Otherwise, in my experience, this, even though it's bonded well, under occlusal forces may end up fracturing or chipping. But you can see beautiful. This was meshed very beautifully in there. It looks great. Bonded well. Little color difference. But I don't think anybody would notice that except for the dentist and you and me. Here's one again that I showed you before. This technically would be an inlay. That's a giant inlay. I don't know if this technically counts as a cusp tip. We might be able to call that an onlay. But that's the beautiful restoration. A little bit of staining here. That may become an aesthetic concern to the patient. I'm not sure if there's a little piece of amalgam there or if that's just staining. Probably, honestly, I'd go for a crown on that tooth, probably. Although this may be a great solution. My worry is with that little line there, that could potentially be a fracture, remaining fracture. It might just be a marginal ridge groove, but at the same time, I'd crown it. I probably would have crowned it, but this is a great kind of middle of the road option. An inlay. All right, case study number 3. This technically on the right side, I think that would be an onlay because these cusp tips are covered. You can see the design. Looking back at this, these walls are too thin. Probably should have covered them. in my experience, that's going to chip at some point. Here's this guy here, and remember that one we said we'd crown, so there's a crown there. This is looks like a CERESmart or a Vita Anamic or a Lava Ultimate inlay. I don't have post-op intraoral photos, but radiographically it looks good. Looks like it was done well there. Here's a case study. Got a bunch of pictures of this one. This gentleman presented to the office, and this really speaks to knowing your own radiographic capabilities from the standpoint of being able to read your own x-rays and what kind of sensor you have. So this is what he looks like intraorally. You know, questionable if you were to just do a real quick look. You may not necessarily see any caries. There's a little bit, and sorry for the washed out appearance on the, there's a lot of light. This intraoral camera is not the best camera. A little bit of decalcification there, a little bit of white spot there. But you can kind of see these, you know, triangles here. Kind of. So I talked to them about, you have some interproximal cavity, some cavities in between your teeth. And here's how I like to say this to patients. You have a couple of choices. We could either, one, leave them alone, let them grow, and eventually you're going to end up needing a root canal and or a crown and or a root canal. Or we can fix them now. I'd recommend fixing them with a filling. You have two choices of filling material. The first choice, what I'd recommend is the best choice, is a ceramic filling we call an inlay. The ceramic is a much stronger material. It's made to a lot higher precision and has a higher long-term success rate. The alternative to that is a composite restoration, which is basically a plastic, which a lot of people have already. And I'd point out to them, yeah, you've already got a couple of these plastic fillings. They look like they're doing fine. In the end, once the filling gets larger, a stronger material is needed. So an inlay or an onlay would be a better choice. He didn't really believe me that he had cavities. He couldn't really see those dark spots. This one's a lot more visible there. And so you can see a couple incipients down there. So I told him, well, I'll take some pictures once we open it up and show you what we look like. So here's what they look like. Yeah, those are pretty obviously cavities. This area I'd call incipient. There we've definitely got recurrent decay. Broken through the DEJ. So yeah, all these definitely warranted restoration there. But that goes to show you, and taking pictures like this during the procedure really helps the patient to see what's going on, because, you know, intraorally they look perfect. I mean, you can't, unless you really look at that spot, you can't really see anything. So being able to compare, you know, oh my gosh, this is what you look like and this is what's actually going on in there. These patients, it really helps to educate them. And I offer to give them these photos. You know, take this photo home, show it to your mom or your dad or your girlfriend or whatever. And then that can be something that markets itself for you. So here's the preps. Now these are pretty big preps. I didn't originally think, let's go back, I didn't think I'd have to extend that far, but the mesial and buccal and lingual spread of that interproximal caries was phenomenal. So by the time I got it out, it was open way out, and then I ended up, you know, coming through kind of in that fashion to cover everything. So a little less conservative than I originally wanted to be, but to get all the decalcification out of these areas, it took a lot more opening than originally I had wanted to do. So there's the preps compared to the pre-op picture, and there's the pre-seat, you know, the evaluation looking at the seat and the fit. Turned out beautiful. They seat just nice. You know, they're not prepared yet, not polished. And then here's the, you know, the delivery. One minor concern for you, you know, this was smoothed off a little bit. We have just a little microscopic marginal mismatch there, and you can see the margin in that area. But in the end, they looked great. You know, I didn't quite recreate all the anatomy, the tertiary anatomy, and all the grooves that are in there. But in the end, it turned out just great. So, good case for you. I told them we'd monitor these other areas, take a look. I didn't really see anything intraorally on that spot when we had them opened up. Let's go back here. Yeah, I mean, you can see a little whiteness, but it's not nearly as concerning as the other spots were. Okay, whoop, I'm going too far. All right, so let's talk about materials choices now. So basically, this is our spectrum of choices. We've got composites all the way to zirconium oxide, and then we could theoretically do metal. I've got a gold inlay in my mouth that's been in since dental school, so 12 or 13 years. It's been perfect, no problems, no concerns, it's great. So that's a great choice. There are studies, and I've got a document that I tracked down from one of the many CEREC doctors out there that has comparisons of materials to tooth strength. And when you look at it, you know, hybrid ceramics, Lava Ultimate, CEREC Smart Dynamic are much stronger than any type of, than your natural tooth is, for that matter. The glass ceramics are even stronger, and then of course you got your Emax, Celtra Duo, and the Soprinity, the kind of the hybrid. These two are hybrid zirconium mixed with lithium disilicate or lithium silicate. In the end, my go-to, if I'm going to do some sort of a inlay or an onlay, I love these hybrids. And I've gravitated to the CEREC Smart. I really like that material. I'm not paid by them to say that. I actually have a Lava Ultimate restoration in my mouth, which I love, but I've gravitated to the CEREC Smart material. I really like it. I think it's a great material. Trying to erase that. It's a great material, the CEREC Smart is. It's easy to mill. It mills really fast. You don't have to fire it. It's very strong. It bonds in really well. Aesthetically, they look great. They polish so easy. I know a lot of us use the Vita and the Empress. I love these blocks. They're great. Nothing wrong with any of them. Honestly, clinical choice, it's totally up to you. What restoration works for you, what material works for you in your hands, and is the best long-term solution for the patient is perfect. So that's the goal. Get a good restoration that works well in your hands for your patients. Okay, bonding protocols. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Remove it from the machine, from the mill, and clean it. Very first step, and this is the most often skipped step. I like to use isopropyl alcohol, scrub it down. You don't want to necessarily use water, just water, because there are oils in this milling unit. With the CEREC milling unit, there's oil mixed with the water. So you need to get that oil off of there. So clean it with isopropyl alcohol, try it in, make sure it seats okay, do your adjustments if needed. If you're going to stain and glaze and polish, like you can see on these two restorations, which looks beautiful, you would do it, of course, after the trial fit. Personally, I almost never stain and glaze unless I'm doing a bridge or an anterior crown. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with it. I just don't put that much weight to staining and glazing unless there's something incredibly visible. So once we've cleaned it, trial fit, stain and glaze if you want to, then you have to isolate, and then we're going to prepare both the restoration and the tooth, cement it, finish, and polish. We're going to go through each of these steps. This is what I use. Monobond Etch and Prime, which is an Ivoclar product, the Adhes Universal in the Viva pen, which is also an Ivoclar product, and Verilink Aesthetic, which is also obviously an Ivoclar product. I really like how these materials work together. It's a very simple bonding protocol. This is for the restoration, for the ceramic, and of course this is for the tooth. This takes 60 seconds. It's a 20-second scrub and a 40-second leave it alone. This is a 20-second scrub, an air dry and a light. And then you apply the cement, and we're going to kind of go through that. Now, there are a lot of people that like to use this yellow etch, hydrofluoric acid or red etch, there's some red versions as well, and silane, and that's perfectly fine. What's interesting though is you combine these two and you get that. So this will do everything that the yellow etch and silane does, only a lot better in my experience. So I always go to etch and prime, monobond etch and prime. You can kind of see it says etch and prime, not the monobond S, the monobond etch and prime for my ceramic conditioning. And then here's the process. So this should be etch and prime here. So with etch and prime, there's a 20-second scrub and then 40 seconds of reaction. So it still takes 60 seconds, but with the etch and prime, 20-second scrub, 40-second react, then a rinse and a dry. Rinse and dry. But the process is basically the same for almost everything. Rinse the restoration, If you're going to do total etch, which I almost never do unless it's all enamel, rinse and dry, apply the adhesive. This is a 20-second scrub, then a light cure. I'm sorry, dry and then a light cure. So adhesive, dry, light cure. 20 seconds, then we want to dry it until it stops moving, and then a 10-second light cure. All right, then for me, when I'm applying the restoration, when I'm putting the restoration in, I don't put the cement on the restoration. I put the cement in the tooth, because for me, it's just a lot easier to get the restoration to seat, or to hold on to it when there's no cement on it. So I will put it in there and scrub it around a little bit, either with the tip of the cement or with a microbrush. And then I like to use the light, and I put it right on the occlusal surface and press really hard to make sure the restoration's seated. Then I'm going to cure it for a couple of seconds. And then I'm going to do the 2 second, 2 second, 2 second, 2 second on each corner. Then, since Verilink Aesthetic has such a really long gel phase, you can peel it off, kind of like Fuji that's half set. Peel it off. Then you can use your liquid strip if you use it to avoid the oxygen inhibited layer. Then cure the rest of the restoration. Then polish it and adjust it. And if you want to use a protectant afterward, that's great. But usually delivery, once you've etched it, and cleanup with etch and prime, with this solution here, delivery and cleanup takes me 5 minutes. So, and here's the materials. Here's the adhese. Here's the etch and prime that I was mentioning about. You can look all this stuff up online. Monobond etch and prime, much higher bond strengths than all these. It's a great material, good stuff. In the end, my personal experience is this stuff works really well. But like I said before, what works well in your hands for your patients, what works best for you is perfectly fine as long as it's a good long-term solution. So here's the pre-op. Here's the preparation. Looks like they either left some composite or put a buildup in there. And then there's the post-delivery. I'm sorry, that's the try-in. This is the etching with the etch and prime. So they're scrubbing it. There's this 20-second scrub and then a 40-second reaction time. There's a total etch and a rinse. 20-second scrub with adhese. Verilink Aesthetic is applied to the bonding surface of the restoration. I'd suggest applying it to the tooth instead of the restoration, just because it's so hard to hold on to it. I don't like these opera sticks, but you can use that. Whatever works best for you is fine. Then the light cure, the tack, again I said tack it down, clean off the excess, pick it off, use liquid strip if you want to, then polish and floss everything, and in the end it should look like a beautiful natural tooth. So there's my contact information. Now you got my cell phone number. Feel free to text me if you have any questions, or email or phone call, but don't spam or send me any junk. I'm happy to help if you have questions. I think all this stuff is also on my LinkedIn profile if you want to call or send me any information. Basically, that is it in a nutshell. I think getting back to this one, let me hit play here again. This, I put in Monobond Plus. I chose the wrong instruction sheet, but it makes sense. And if we go forward to this conditioning step, this should be the etch and prime. So just remember Monobond etch and prime, 20-second scrub, 40 seconds of reaction, and then rinse it and dry it until it's bone dry. And all this kind of greenish turquoise color should go away. So that, in a really quick nutshell, is the basics of inlays and onlays. Again, the goal is to be as conservative as possible, but provide a long-term, long-standing restoration for the patient. We used to only have two choices, fillings and crowns. Well, now we have these inlays and onlays, so there's a big gray area between where you go from filling, transitioning to inlay, to onlay, to crown. So I'd suggest we should probably be doing more inlays and onlays, because if we can save all of this healthy tooth structure, as opposed to getting a two-surface wide filling, then cutting the whole thing off and doing a crown. If we can save some of that for the long term, in the end, it's going to be a blessing and a benefit to the patient.